5 mistakes you are making that are causing hormone imbalance. That's what we're talking about today on the She's Healthy podcast. Stay tuned.
Welcome to She's Healthy, a podcast for ambitious women on their journey to become the healthiest version of themselves. I'm your host, Lori Aikman.
Welcome back to the She's Healthy podcast. If this is your first time listening, my name is Lori Aikman. I am a nurse practitioner out of Florida, and I have a concierge functional medicine practice where I help highly ambitious women to feel like themselves again, to have the energy, the health, the vitality that their dreams require. So with this podcast, we're bringing you today, we've been talking about hormone imbalance. On the last episode, we talked specifically about estrogen. Today, I'm talking about progesterone, but we're talking about it in a way of what are the 5 common things you may be doing that are driving down your progesterone and causing hormone imbalance. Now, before we dive into the episode, I do have to give you my medical disclaimer. I am a nurse practitioner, but this podcast is for informational purposes only. So I always recommend that you follow up with your doctor, your practitioner, your provider before you make changes to your health plan. All right. So let's do a little refresher. In the last episode, if you did not listen to it, we were talking about hormone balance. So that term hormone balance really, or hormone imbalance, really comes from the balance of estrogen and progesterone. Okay. So estrogen and progesterone are 2 ovarian hormones. They're hormones made by our ovaries, and they affect a lot of our cycle, our monthly cycle, and what's happening in our body. So progesterone in particular is to balance out estrogen, okay? And when we have that, again, when we have that imbalance, and I talked about in the last episode, this can be, if we have imbalance, it can be from high estrogen, but it can also be from low progesterone. If you're watching on YouTube, I've got my hands up. So if you have high estrogen, you can have imbalance, but also if you have low progesterone, you can have imbalance. And if you have both of those, it's like double whammy, right? You're having some severe hormone imbalance. So getting a good balance of that estrogen and progesterone is just going to help us feel best, less PMS, easier cycles, better mood, better sleep, things like that. So again, a little bit of refresher on progesterone. I talked about in a previous episode, we have our normal cycle. So if you're not on hormonal birth control or IUD, maybe if you are having normal cycles each month, what is happening is that your ovary is releasing an egg. It's releasing a follicle, which contains an egg, and then that egg travels down the fallopian tube. If conception does not occur, if it doesn't meet with a sperm and pregnancy happen, then what happens is that the lining of the uterus sheds, that's just high level overview of what's going on in a monthly cycle. So progesterone in particular, if we think about the name gestation is pregnancy, and then obviously promoting. So progesterone is really important in early pregnancy. If you are somebody that's TTC, trying to conceive, or had struggled with your progesterone in that aspect, right? You know the importance of progesterone in that early phase of pregnancy. Sometimes doctors will give women progesterone during that early pregnancy if they've had low progesterone, because it's going to help that pregnancy to maintain and sustain. And just to explain what is happening, again, that follicle is released from the ovary, and it's like a little sac that contains an egg. The egg is released, and then what's left of that sac becomes what we call the corpus luteum. And that sac actually produces, that's where we get our progesterone from. So ovulation is really important to progesterone, right? If we don't ovulate, if we don't release that follicle, we don't have that corpus luteum that's active, then we're not going to produce progesterone, right? So if we're finding out if you're ovulating is actually a great way to get an idea if you have adequate progesterone, right? And if your balance or your hormones are going to be in balance. So again, that corpus luteum is going to make progesterone. So let's talk about this is, again, a high level overview on this episode, but benefits of progesterone are going to be, again, it's going to balance out estrogen. And what this means specifically for our periods is that it's going to make our periods lighter. So estrogen is going to promote or cause the uterus to grow, to thicken, to get ready for pregnancy. If pregnancy doesn't happen, right, again, then our period happens. So the thicker that uterine lining has gotten, if we have a lot of estrogen or if we don't have progesterone, then the heavier, more painful periods that we have. So when we have a good amount of progesterone, right, that's going to keep the uterine lining from getting as thick, and we're going to have better periods. So I always think of this, gosh, back when I was a teen, right, I had, and honestly, for a lot of my adult life, I've had very heavy cycles. And I did not learn, if you are in the same boat, I didn't learn this stuff till later in adulthood, until I started working with women with their hormones and from a more functional perspective, right? Looking back, I could have done things to promote my progesterone levels that would have helped make my periods a lot better, right? Those heavy, painful periods, that bad PMS is actually not normal, even if it's normal for you. So some other benefits of progesterone are progesterone actually can help with breast cancer prevention. Progesterone boosts our thyroid function. Progesterone can help to decrease inflammation, on preventing heart disease. It can help with building muscle. And something else it does, I see this a lot, is that it promotes sleep and then a sense of calm. So this is very common to see when women are struggling with sleep or struggling with anxiety, anxious mood. A lot of times it can come from low progesterone levels. The reason being is that progesterone becomes, a lot of our hormones, if you don't know that, a lot of our hormones like start as one hormone and then they get converted into another hormone and then another hormone. So progesterone gets converted into something called allopregnenolone, which is a calming neurosteroid, and it acts like GABA. So GABA is a calming neurotransmitter. It's actually what is stimulated when we take something like Xanax, Ativan, those benzodiazepines, those stimulate GABA. So think our progesterone is like our natural benzos, right? Progesterone is like our natural anti-anxiety. So when women have hormonal imbalance like this, it can really trigger anxiety and can trigger issues with sleep as well. So with that being said, again, low progesterone, what that looks like is, again, can be trouble sleeping, issues with anxiety, stress, hot flashes, also night sweats, vaginal dryness can be a problem, brain fog and memory issues, low mood, heart palpitations are also signs of low progesterone. But then we have the reverse of that. What if we have high progesterone? So I honestly have not seen this. I think of high progesterone when I think of pregnancy, right? Especially that first trimester of pregnancy. So think tired, feeling fatigued, maybe having some breast swelling or tenderness. You can also have decreased libido. You can also have lower mood with too high of progesterone. And you can be more prone to yeast infections with high progesterone. Again, we don't commonly see high progesterone, but it is a possibility, and those are some of the signs. So let's talk about what are the 5 mistakes that you could be making that are causing hormonal imbalance, causing you to have decreased levels of progesterone. So number 1 is, and I know some of y'all might have heard, or you've heard, I talked to a woman last week and she's like, yeah, my doctor just told me it's stress. I need to decrease my stress. And I know I've talked to a lot of women that can get really defensive, I would say, when they hear this, like, I just can't, right? And it's like, I totally get it. I have 3 children. I have my own business, right? Thinking about decreasing my stress is like, well, my life is just stressful. You might feel that way. I want to act as a coach right here in this moment on the podcast. It's not just stress, right? It's not just decreasing the things that may be happening in our life. Yes, we should automate, delegate, delete things. If you are an ambitious woman, especially if you're a business owner, right? Maybe you're in high level leadership position, you understand the value of your time, and that's probably something you've already done is what can I automate? What can I delete off my calendar? And what can I delegate? What can I get somebody else to do for me? I mean, this could look like ordering your groceries, having a house cleaner, things like that. But again, it's not just getting the things off your calendar, because, right, there's always going to be, we live in a fast-paced life, right, a fast-paced world, especially if we are in the US, you're in more industrialized countries, we're just not set up to rest. Look at countries like Spain, countries where they take a siesta, right? Business closed down in the middle of the day and everybody goes home and takes a nap. We don't live in a society that's set up like that. I know for me, I get up in the morning and I'm like, go, go, go throughout the day. But when we think about reducing stress, we really have to think about decreasing stress effect on our body and how we are responsive to stress. And this might not even be something that you can recognize until a outside observer can help you see it and bring awareness to it. I know for me, this has been true for me, where like anything, like it's like stress, it's like you live with stress in you. When we it's kind of like looking at life with glass half empty, right? And looking at, well, there's just not enough time, right? When we have that view of life that it's just stressful, that is going to that affects, we get the effect of stress on our brain. And so some of it can be some mindset shifts around how we experience stress, how we're experiencing life day to day, can be getting things off your calendar and decreasing the demand on you. But it also can be like, there may be things that right? I have 3 children. I'm not going to give away one of my children. Things like that, right? There's things in your life that you're not going to be able to change, but you're going to have to figure out a way that doesn't cause stress on your body. And one of the biggest ways I have found that helps for me with that is breath work or deep breathing. Because and I've talked about this on other episodes, it does physiologically decrease the stress response on your body, right? So I'm going to leave it at that. But what stress does is, from a hormonal aspect, it's going to decrease the release of FSH and LH. So those are 2 other hormones that come from our brain that signal down to our ovaries. So when we have a lot of stress, that FSH and LH release is going to get dampened. We're not going to ovulate. And again, we're not going to make progesterone. Stress, another way that stress affects our hormones is when we have chronic stress, especially chronic release of cortisol is going to raise blood sugar and insulin. It's going to decrease our immune function. And it's going to, in other hormonal ways, going to decrease ovulation, leading to, again, less progesterone. Then we have sleep. We have, getting sleep, right? I can totally relate because I'm in the season of small children who still wake up in the middle of the night. But as much as we can pack our sleep, and I've been a night shift worker in the past, so I totally get if you don't have a normal pattern. But as much as we can control our sleep, this is going to be best for us hormonally. So for some of us, this means, right, going to bed after the kids go to sleep and not staying up and like binging on TV, or which I know is like, I talk to moms like that, it's like, that's finally my time by myself when my kids are asleep. And I just need to I probably should go to bed, but I just need to relax in that moment. That's the time where I'm like, do some deep breathing, do something that's going to decrease that stress response rather than just like zoning out with TV. But getting about 7 to 8 hours a night is going to be best for your body. It's going to help with our circadian rhythm, which affects hormonal release throughout the day. It's going to decrease our stress response, right? When we have less sleep, we get stressed more easily. I know for me, when I have less sleep, my appetite increases, which is going to, depending on what I pick, drive up blood sugar, drive up insulin. And then that decrease in sleep is also, again, be a stressor with that HPA axis, affecting, again, those hormonal release, the hormonal release of that LH from the brain, affecting our estrogen and progesterone levels. All right, so recapping, the first 2 mistakes we talked about were stress and how stress impacts our hormone balance. We talked about sleep and how sleep impacts our hormone balance. And those 2, lack of sleep is a stressor, right? Those kind of go hand in hand. The next one is exercise. Exercise is like hormones. Hormones are kind of Goldilocks. You don't want too much. You don't want, not enough. Same thing with exercise. We want to move, but we don't want to be over exercising. And I see both ends of the spectrum. I see people who aren't prioritizing exercise and just need to get moving, need to get their body moving. We know that exercise is actually very well studied for anxiety relief. It's actually one of those more natural non-medicinal ways to help improve anxiety is exercise or movement. But then at the same time, I have high achiever, overachiever ladies, and I've been in that camp as well at times, that are over exercising. They're doing very high intensity exercise. They're training for triathlons, marathons, they're doing CrossFit, they're, doing these more high intensity extreme sports. And not that you can't do those, but we have to give ourselves time to recover. And I think I was an athlete growing up. I played sports all through school, up through high school. I played college volleyball. And then I did CrossFit competitively as an adult. And I think when I was younger, right, when you're younger, you need less recovery, but you really still do need recovery. You just don't think that you do. You don't get injured as much. When you get older, you start getting injured and you start having those negative effects of not having proper recovery time, not nourishing yourself well. So there really is that delicate balance, but of exercising, moving, but not to the degree that you're overdoing it. So exercise also aids with our stress response. So again, we talked about it, reducing anxiety. Exercise, especially building muscle. So doing things like moving your body, walking is great, but doing some kind of resistance moving, whether this is using weights or not, this could be body weight type movement, but doing some kind of resistance movement where you are building muscle helps to improve your blood sugar and insulin levels. It helps to improve insulin sensitivity specifically. And then just think from a physical standpoint, it helps with blood flow, right? You get blood flow, improved blood flow through your body the more you move your body. So think blood flow to your pelvis, right? We need movement just from that standpoint too, to keep things functioning and working well. Same goes for your gut, right? Getting up and moving is a great way to make sure that you're supporting your gut. The next one on the list is blood sugar. So this one, I have this conversation with every single woman. I think a lot of times we don't think about our blood sugar unless we have a blood sugar, and we probably don't think about that until we actually have diabetes or pre-diabetes, right? We go to the doctor and they're like, it's actually, that high, then blood sugar is not necessarily on our radar. And now blood sugar is a lot more out there. Like there's these books and there's talks about fasting and how it affects your insulin levels. So it is more out in the media, I guess you would say. But I find that the healthy women that I work with actually have blood sugar issues that they're not aware of. And the most common thing, so what it could look like in a day if you wore a continuous glucose monitor, is that they're having fluctuations in their blood sugar. They're having, steep increases in their blood sugar. And then they could be having steep drop-offs in their blood sugar. And so this labile blood sugar, this blood sugar that's up and down and not so steady, I'll let you know, especially if you're watching on YouTube, I'm talking with my hands. You don't want your blood sugar to have these really high peaks and valleys. You want your blood sugar to be more gradual. You want to have little fluctuations up and down like this with your meals, but you don't want these big, big increases and decreases. And what I see often is that women typically undereat on protein, and they're eating more carbohydrates. They're trying to eat less, or maybe they're just eating less because they're busy, and they're specifically not eating enough protein. Protein is going to slow down your digestion and help having that more, stable blood sugar, steady blood sugar, versus especially when we're under eating on protein and that paired with carbohydrates, that's when we see these, steeper peaks and valleys, if you will. So low blood sugar, when our blood sugar drops, back to the stress point, low blood sugar is actually a stressor on the body and will trigger cortisol release, right? High blood sugar will also cause high insulin, which leads to inflammation. And then insulin then affects the function of our pituitary gland, which the pituitary is the one we talked about, is going to cause that release of FSH and LH. That's then going to affect the ovaries. So these swings in our blood sugar, when we have high insulin levels, this actually decreases our ovarian function. So it's going to affect our levels of hormones. Specifically, a lot of times it's decreasing progesterone. think of if you are, again, trying to stay high level, we can literally break down and do an episode on each of these parts. But if you are somebody who has PCOS, right, you might know about insulin resistance and having high insulin levels and how that affects the ovaries. The one thing it does is that actually drives up your levels of testosterone in place of your estrogen and progesterone. Okay. All right. Sticking high level, we're going to move on to number 5. So the last mistake or thing that we might be doing that's causing hormone imbalance in our body is things that promote inflammation. Obviously, you don't do inflammation, but if you're doing things that cause inflammation in your body unknowingly, right, that can impact your hormones. When we talk about inflammation, we're going to talk about things that can drive up inflammation. But inflammation, what happens is these inflammatory cytokines are what they call. So these inflammatory markers are triggered in our body when there's inflammation. And what happens is at the cellular level, these inflammatory markers will impact ovulation. So they make the ovaries less responsive to FSH. So again, that hormone that the brain signals down to the ovaries to make estrogen. It also impacts ovulation, which then impacts our progesterone production. So, and what is happening on the level of a cell, and again, high level, our hormones go and attach to our cell. There's usually a receptor on the cell for those hormones. And what the inflammatory markers do is they actually block those receptors. So our hormones can go to the cell, but the cell doesn't like recognize the hormones there because that inflammatory marker is blocking that cell receptor, right? So I don't know, I'm trying to think of a good analogy for this. So you're going to your friend's house and you're telling her that you're there, you're trying to ring the doorbell, but it's really loud in her house and she can't even hear that the doorbell is ringing, right? Would be maybe an example of how inflammation blocks the cell and that its response to your hormones. So, and when we think of inflammation, again, this is something we should do a whole nother episode on just down the road, but things that cause inflammation are, again, blood sugar, right? Sugar, it causes inflammation. Alcohol causes inflammation. Smoking causes inflammation. High levels of stress and cortisol cause inflammation. Then we could get into gut dysfunction and having inflammation and infection in the gut when we're eating foods that we're sensitive to. Dairy is also very inflammatory, and wheat can be very inflammatory. Those are kind of the top 2 inflammatory foods. Others are then soy, corn, and alcohol. Top 6 inflammatory foods, right, that most of us probably have in our diet on a day-to-day basis if we are not if we're just eating the general standard American diet. You're going out to eat at a restaurant, right? A lot of times you're getting very inflammatory foods. In that, you have to be really proactive in order to reduce inflammation through the foods that we're eating. Okay. All right. So let's recap real quick. We talked about those 5 mistakes that you could be making causing hormone imbalance. So 1, that's unregulated stress. 2, that's poor sleep. 3 was maybe not enough exercise or also too much exercise. 4 is having fluctuations in your blood sugar. And then finally, 5 is inflammation. So that is it for our episode today on hormone imbalance. I invite you, if you love what you're learning here on our channel on this episode, I invite you to subscribe, whether you're listening on YouTube or one of the podcast platforms. I'll let you know next week we'll be talking about natural things that you can do, those more holistic approaches to balancing your hormones. And I've got some exciting news. We've got some guests coming up on the podcast in the month of October. So we're kind of bringing in this mini series called She's Ambitious, where we're talking to different professional women on their area of expertise and just learning from them. I find that the women that are ambitious in one area in life are often ambitious in many areas of their life. So they want to be healthy. They want to, just really are ambitious and high achieving in many areas of their lives. So I'm excited to bring these guest experts on. So please subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you next time.